But there's a whole lot of manipulation going on in terms of what voters actually understand about these spending proposals. Will Flanders is going to try to break it down in a way that we can understand it. But basically, the people selling the referendum are probably not being totally honest about what it's going to cost.
Yeah, we had over 90 referenda on the ballot across the state in the spring election here. $1.1 billion in new spending was approved. And you're absolutely right that the districts are incentivized to make it as difficult as possible for folks to figure out what the true cost of these referenda will be to them. And in this new report, we laid out a few different ways that districts make that happen and make it as hard as possible for people to understand.
So what's the easiest way to con people? What's the easiest way to make it look like, oh, that's not that much, or it's it's absolutely necessary? Some things that I didn't see included in the report are the excess costs of the projects themselves. For instance, if they're building projects, they're just piled on with nonsensical green nonsense. But that's a topic for another time, I suppose. But how is it that typically people get kind of snowed into thinking it's not going to be that bad?
Yeah, so we listed three different ways, and we can go through them sort of individually here. But the first one is that when districts talk about what this is going to be, what effect this is going to have on your taxes, they'll often choose, like Milwaukee, for example, chose a $200,000 house, and here's what the effect will be. But I think it's important to realize, especially in this time of huge inflation, that home valuations are going up substantially. Every year it seems like I get in the mail that my house is worth this much more money. Of course, that's not resources you can take advantage of if you can't move and you can't sell it because inflation's so high that you can't get a new home loan. So when folks look at those numbers, they need to think about, yes, the effect on the mill rate is this amount at this valuation. But as the value of the home goes up over time, those amounts can be way off. There was a good example from the Monroe School District a couple years ago where folks were told that their taxes were going to go up by like $39, and they ended up going up by about $600 because at the same time this referendum passed, they redid the sort of valuation of homes and exponentially increased the amount of increased cost there. That's way number one.
So way number one is you're not counting on your assessed value going up. Number one, nobody does. They're like, okay, well, it's $200. All right, gosh, that sucks, but it's going to be $200. No, next year it might be $250. 5 years from now, it might be $400. That it's, so they're not being honest either, especially for these in perpetuity referenda. They're not being honest about how that money is going to be spent ever. And how they could possibly account for what would be more dollars with higher valuations.
Exactly. And in many instances, they're counting on these valuations going up simultaneously so they can sort of snow people over in terms of what the true cost to taxpayers will be. So I think that's a really, really important way and something that a lot of folks don't think about. Sometimes our taxes stay pretty similar for several years in a row, but then you're sort of hit with this increased valuation and taxes go through the roof, and that's something that's very key to a lot of these proposals.
All right. So valuation's one way that people are no one's leveling with you that as your valuation goes up, so is your tax commitment if you vote yes. What are some other ways? Talk about how they manipulate the mill rate.
Yeah. So I think, a couple of the other ways that are really important here, and these two are pretty closely related. The first is by choosing balloon payments. And, we all know if we're looking at car loans or if we're looking at a mortgage, we don't want a payment that's going up over time, right? We want those things to stay steady. But oftentimes these school districts will choose payments that actually increase as time goes on. And the reason for that is it's also related to the third reason here, that they want to hide the cost of things if a referendum is not approved. So taxes might be scheduled to go down. We have referenda from the past that might be expiring. We have TIF districts around the state that might be coming to an end. All those sorts of things can lower taxes. But what they want to do as time goes on is, say that taxes are going to be stable. Your taxes are not going to go up if you pass this referendum. What they're not telling folks is, well, we've actually set this up as a balloon payment where the payment on this one particular referendum is going up over time, and we're going to sort of hide from you that your taxes would otherwise be going down if this referendum wasn't passed. So folks aren't aware of what the actual true impact is, because they're not accounting for the fact if this wasn't passed, your taxes will be going down for all sorts of other tax reasons that they put on taxpayers over the years in each district.
Yeah, so there's no compulsion to level with taxpayers. So this just happened, I think, just a few years ago in Verona, where a TIF district was going to close. People's taxes would have gone down. They rushed a referendum through before the TIF district closed, so that it felt like sort of a no impact whatsoever. So they're not required. No one's required by law to say, this is going to cost this much. Consider increased valuations. Oh, and there's a TIF district or whatever that is going to close. And so your taxes could potentially go down if you say no. You rely on what? Groups like Will or groups like Chambers of Commerce to come out and say something about it because the government's not required to level with you?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. We put together a tax calculator for Milwaukee for this last referendum. And we had a lot of folks come to us and say, can you do this for more referendum? Actually, even Chris Larson sarcastically told us we should do this for more districts, thinking we're just calling out Milwaukee. In reality, this is a problem across the state. The Milwaukee one was a huge referendum, but this is a problem across the state and everywhere. Folks need to know what the actual impact on their taxes would be, and there is no law in place for that information to be there. And we're sort of calling on policymakers in the next legislative session to evaluate this and see if we can make this more clear for folks to know what they're actually getting into.
Well, and we know that districts, let's say a school district or a county or whatever it is, hires a consultant group. And the consultant group says, this is how you put the information out. You don't tell people their taxes would go down if they vote no. You don't tell people that they probably should consider their increased valuations over time. You don't tell people that you're shining them on by only talking about the mill rate. That's what the consultants say. There's money. It should not be permitted that you can hire a team to push a politically motivated tax increase. But that, I know that Dewey Strobel griped about that some years ago, but they're still finding ways to do that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And this is something we actually are going to be looking into going forward, is how much have districts around the state spent local taxpayers' money to advocate for raising taxes on local taxpayers. This is a huge problem. There are districts that are spending a lot of money on advertising for these things. We agree that should not be the case. If you want to put some information out there, yes, it may be, slightly biased. We think we should change what's available on that information and include some of the stuff we've discussed here today. But they absolutely shouldn't be advertising, putting up billboards, spending money on, yard signs and things like that to advocate for tax increases on local taxpayers using that tax money.
In Edgerton, I know that the school district used the parents list, the texting list. So, we have a potential active shooter situation, or, hey, there's a snow day, that list, to advertise for the referendum. So, we know that happened. That's something else that absolutely should not be allowed. Madison used to bring 18-year-old kids into a pep rally and get them not only to get excited to vote for a referendum, but also to try to get their parents to vote for it. So these are ways that you put your thumb on the scale, and it's not a fair fight. You don't get the accurate information. The district has the ability to use resources, both in kind and taxpayer resources, to sell this. And tell me about what you also discovered, which was the number of spending proposals and the amount of these spending proposals is just, it doesn't seem to correlate with just inflation or anything like that. It certainly doesn't correlate within many of the places where these spending proposals are a decline in population.
No, you're absolutely right. We went back to 1990, which is the earliest year that the DPI has available on their website for looking at the cost of referenda. And what we saw is over time the amount of spending on referenda has gone up. You look at like 1992, the amount of approved referenda was about 500 million, but as of today, as we just mentioned, the most recent round, we approved over $1.1 billion of spending. Last year, we approved $1.6 billion of spending. So that's just the approved referenda, right? There's some other ones that failed, but the amount of money being asked for and the amount of referenda that are being put before voters is only going up over time. There are limitations in place that you can only go twice per year. And a lot of districts are, taking advantage of that, and folks eventually just get worn down, right? They get tired of fighting this. We asked for $700 million. Okay, we'll go to $600 million the next time around. eventually
Right.
you sort of find an amount that works, and people just get tired of fighting it over and over again.
Absolutely true. And by the way, in the report that Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty did on this, you adjusted for inflation. So when you're comparing $1992 to $2022, you've adjusted for inflation so that they're as even as you can possibly be. And it shows in real inflation adjusted dollars, the ask is bigger, the number of times. And what are we getting out of this? Are we getting, I don't know, Will, are we getting roads that don't fall apart, schools that can educate kids above 37% proficiency? What are we getting for more spending asks and higher dollar amounts?
Yeah, you won't be surprised based on our previous discussions that we don't think we're getting much at all out of this new spending. Milwaukee has moved itself into the top 10 spending districts in the country with the referendum that was just passed here. It's insane, right? And right now they're getting 20% proficiency. So I'm sure by 2 years from now, right, we're going to see 40, 50% proficiency. I don't think so. And across the states and across the country, there's really no evidence that more spending makes much difference in student outcomes, particularly when a lot of this spending goes to new athletic facilities and new bureaucracy that really doesn't have any direct effect on student performance. So no reason to think these things are actually making a difference for students. And statewide, as you say, proficiency rates under 40% in a lot of areas. In some of our areas like Beloit and Milwaukee, under 20%, and they're spending plenty of money in there already, rest assured.
So is there any referendum reform that has, gone forward in a state that you can point to and say that's a good piece of model legislation?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think what we've done here with limiting the number per year was a good step in the right direction. A lot of states don't have this referendum system like we have in Wisconsin, where districts are regularly going to referendum over and over again. So it's sort of a unique issue that we have, and districts, of course, continually plead poverty when we're in the top half of spending among school districts in the country overall. But somewhat of a unique problem. But we'll be looking for other examples as we go forward and try to move in the next legislative session some of this stuff forward to make it more clear for taxpayers what's actually happening.
We just had 3 record-breaking education spending increases, 3 in 3 budgets. And then, of course, the local governments are asking, local referenda questions are asking for even more than that. Yeah, our schools aren't broke. Thanks for jumping on the program, Will.
Thanks so much. Have a great afternoon.